Good evening and welcome to Speakers Corner UK channel. We are back with a second night in a row. This must be a record. Just so happens that Stops and I are both free, so we thought we'd finish part 2 of the review of Deity Defeater on the Muslim live stream, the arena. So we had the time and that's what we're going to do. So as always, I'll welcome my co-host, Stop Spamming. Good evening, sir. Hope you're well.
Hi guys, hi everybody. And it's not that we're being lazy. It's just that, I'm here because we had to postpone because there was a corona outbreak, and we have to wait 2 weeks for the quarantine to get over and everything. That's why I'm here. I'm not supposed to be here.
Well, there we go. Aren't we lucky? We've got Stops with us tonight, so we'll obviously make full use of that. And with that said, we're going to continue on exactly where we left off last time. So if you're watching this now and you haven't seen part 1, then you might want to go watch that, and we're going to continue exactly where we finished there, and we're going to do that pretty much straight away. So let me share screen here. We can even go full screen, I guess. I don't know if it makes much difference. You can have a look at the comments there, and you can see that we're pretty much at exactly the spot we left off. So I'm now going to move away. I won't be able to see the StreamYard. I'm going to go to the actual stream itself, and I'll do the stop and start here, and Stops, you just shout out when you need to, or if you want to, say anything about any of the text comments, because I won't be able to see them. So with that said, as we've said, hopefully you've watched the first part. If not, go and watch that, and we're going to continue straight on, and here we go.
No audio.
Oh dear. Do you know what? As I started it, I thought, I wonder if I've done that. So let me go back
You didn't.
Obviously not. So,
and just so that people know, we left off, and it's a pity because last week Reaction came in, and I would have loved to have some of his opinions on this, because there are two people who can, because at the moment it's just Yusuf who's contributing. All the others are just waffling, especially Hamza and this Faruqai. But now, because people are so enamored with this Asadullah Ali, who really doesn't contribute anything, he just talks a lot without any content, and now he's joined. And the same thing with this Sajid guy, whom I also think is incredibly shallow and not really with it. It should be only a communication between Yusuf and this guy, Deity, Defeater, who is actually quite clued up. He's very young, but I wish I was at that level when I was his age. I wasn't. I was nowhere near that. So I'm very impressed with him, and this is what we're seeing at the moment. So I'm wondering if Sajid or somebody is going to contribute. You ready?
Yep, let's try now.
Okay.
Young lad.
Nah.
Yeah.
Can I just make one more point, Jake? Just one more point. Right?
It does.
To be honest, when this point of suffering, I'm quite offended by it, and I'll be honest with you. Right? There are people on this planet who have permanent suffering, like myself with my health issues, permanent level of suffering. All these painkillers I have, useless. They don't help me reduce my pain. But I don't call God evil because I'm suffering. Because the opposite of always suffering is hedonism, and hedonism, always seeking pleasure, is a form of suffering in itself. So you need to remove.
Okay, well, how is it a form of suffering? In what way is it a suffering? This is just some like euphemism. Hedonism is a form of suffering. What I mean by suffering is that, and here's the reason why I think hedonism is a form of suffering. Great, now you've presented something. We can either accept it or we can critique it. But just to make a vacuous statement, which is what his colleague was doing, if you remember from part 1, that's just not acceptable, and you need to jump on these things immediately. What do you mean that it's suffering, right? You just made a statement. I could say anything as well. If I don't have to qualify it or justify it, well, I can make any comment I want, right? That's obviously not a substantial thing to do, and he needs to be called out for that. So he's constantly in pain, but he's not calling God out. Presumably, the reason that's the case, which is what we said in part 1, is because he thinks this is all a test. Well, if it is a test, then he should welcome more suffering. And the more the suffering, he should actually be praising God. And if he's not having suffering, he should be cursing God. That's the implication of essentially what he's saying here. Right? But now he won't actually admit to that, which is the logical implication. So what would he actually say? What?
And Mr. T is bringing up an interesting observation. So we are up to 7 Muslims versus 1 non-Muslim.
Yes, exactly. Seven in here at the moment. Or at least They're not all contributing, which is probably a good thing. Otherwise, it'd be a complete mishmash. But there's 7 Muslims who could, in principle, say something, and you have one. Now, imagine any one of these guys coming in with 7 atheists. Do you think any one of these guys would do that? No chance. But it's all fine to have 7 of them with the potential to talk over or dogpile this guy if they wanted to.
The idea of these ideas being in a vacuum, because suffering is real. And the flip side of that is, even if there was always pleasure, that is also a form of suffering on this earth. So either way you flip it, you still end up with suffering in some capacity. So just changing the meanings of the words does not change the actual effects that we experience. And on this
excuse me, Rob, just wait a minute. That's exactly what he's just done.
Well, it's just gibberish to say that hedonism is another form of suffering. And so whichever way you look at it, there's suffering. That is absolute gibberish. Then the question for this guy is, what would it look like such that there was no suffering? Right, I bet you he's not going to have an answer to that. As soon as you hear these sort of comments, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I want to hear from this guy what a world would look like, or what not suffering would actually look like. Because if hedonism, pleasure, or the seeking of pleasure, or in fact having pleasure, is some form of suffering to this guy, what could it possibly mean to not have suffering?
And then he changes the meaning of the word to say, well, this is a form of suffering in itself. And then he complains people are changing the meaning of words. Come on.
Utilitarianism, bro, you're advocating for genocide. And I'll tell you why. The Nazis on the Albert Speer considered people who had mental deficiencies or physical deficiencies. Those people did not fit into the utility of society, and thus they were liable to being killed and sent to camps. And that is what we find today. In America, the country in which you live in, people who don't have access to healthcare because they can't afford it, it's a legal form of utilitarianism. Those people don't deserve to live because they can't afford healthcare. So this system that you're advocating for, I'm sorry, you're just repeating the same thing over and over again because you...
This is utter gibberish. This is just like some words are coming out of his mouth. Now he's decided to have a rant. He can't actually critique or in fact defend his position. So I'm now going to go on some diabolical, red herring rant. What the question to ask him is, what position again was Deity Defeater advocating for? What was the position he was actually advocating for? If we remember back to the very beginning of part 1, he put the claim that, the tremendous suffering in the animal kingdom is inconsistent with an all-merciful or all-good God. But that was his original claim. So what is it that Hijaz, in his, red herring ranting tangent here, is thinking that Deity Defeater is actually advocating for? And how the hell does he get to this idea that it's, this, what was the term he used there? Like social Darwinism type thing. I mean, this is just utter gibberish, right? And there's one of two things you can do in this case. You either respond to this and go down this red herring rabbit hole, or you just ignore it and you carry on as if he said nothing, because he hasn't actually said anything substantive that's on the point, right? He's now got an emotional reaction here because he's somebody who suffers, and somehow he thinks that it's justified for him to suffer and not to complain to God. So now he's now just ranting at the world or at something that's inconceivable. Who knows?
And we need to, I need to draw attention to the fact that Pio has just silently, quietly taken the Shahada. La ilaha Muhammad illallah. Okay, there you go. He wrote this, by the way. You can't see this, but he wrote this.
No, I can't see it now.
Because you don't want to accept the possibility that a creator exists. I'm sorry, one last point. You really need to read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. That last point of suffering, you always choose a life of suffering over a life of pleasure. I would read chapter 16. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
What?
Wait, sorry, can I just respond to what was said really fast?
Yeah, of course.
No, but you see, okay, so here's where perhaps the lack of maturity is in there, right? Don't respond to that. Just ignore that and say, right, you've had your rant. I'm going to go back to the actual topic. Thanks for giving us an emotional rant. And you could do something like that. Of course, that will generate some response. Or you just ignore it and you say, okay, as I was saying, right? And that's perhaps even a better thing. As I was saying, Yusuf, like he's not actually said anything there because he hasn't said anything substantial. Right? That would be another way to deal with this. But he's now very, attracted to responding to this. He feels like he has to respond to everything. And I just don't think that's necessary, because eventually they're going to throw enough claims. You can't respond to everything, especially when there's so many of them there. So you now have to pick the most important ones. And that is where the experience comes in, choosing the right responses to critique, because you can't do them all.
Do you want to go into comments?
Okay.
What, live comments? Only if you think it's valuable. If it's on topic, otherwise, no, probably not.
Read the last one.
It's rare to get fresh meat in here. So do sharing is caring. Yeah, obviously. I mean, this is the low-level mentality. Fresh meat, as if these guys are the sharks, and there's come to the. But that tells you a lot about the mentality, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And again, it tells me that somebody like that isn't worth engaging. I like people saying things like this because it exposes exactly the mentality. And there's no point in punching down, because then you get accused of going after low-hanging fruit, which is exactly not what we want to do anyway. So that person is now, excluded themselves from any conversation with me, at least, because I can see the sort of mentality that's going on. So
I just thought I'd point it out.
Yeah.
So in terms of the first point about how without suffering we could not experience well-being, that may be a fact about the way our brains work currently. But there's nothing logically impossible about making it so that we can appreciate well-being even without experiencing suffering. My claim was not that there would be no suffering. It's that my claim is that there is some suffering that seems to be unnecessary in the world that is hard to explain under theism, but much easier to explain under atheism. In terms of the point about the Nazis being utilitarian, I think that this is a misunderstanding of what utilitarianism is. Utilitarianism does not say that it's whatever the goals of some central planner is, it's always good. Utilitarianism says that the thing that is good is well-being, the thing that is bad is suffering. Those are what's good. And I think that the suffering that Jewish people experienced during the Holocaust dramatically outweighed any positive well-being that it brought about, which is why I think that if we look throughout history, utilitarians have overwhelmingly been on the right side of history. For example, Bentham, Mill, and Sidgwick were very far ahead of their time and supported, they were all in favor of rights for women. They were all in favor of getting rid of slavery.
Just name one utilitarian society that has not caused suffering.
Wow.
Just one.
Well, I don't think that there has been a utilitarian society.
And there can't be. Why can't there be a utilitarian society?
Well, I think most people. Well, wait. What would you mean by a utilitarian society?
Well,
So
society, go ahead, Yusuf.
I was just going to say, do you not think like pretty much all of these, say, dictatorship, be that Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, do you not think they were motivated by trying to cause a great amount of pleasure for a specific amount of people? Like the Jewish people were a minority in Nazi Germany, for example, and so Hitler, he was thinking in terms of the Aryans and the greatest amount of pleasure for them, and he saw the minority as causing a great amount of suffering for them. Obviously, we don't necessarily agree with these statements of his, but within that framework, he could be thinking like a utilitarian.
Okay, but that's a trivial statement to say within that framework. If he means within utilitarianism and you have well-being, then I think it's trivially easy to show how these people were mistaken about what they thought. And if they're going to say simply the well-being of their own tribe, well, then, that falls prey to, well, all the other tribes around them can say as a collective, as a super tribe, we think that the well-being is to wipe you out. And if Hitler and his ilk were consistent, they'd have to concede that it's fine for them to be wiped out. Now, it's unlikely that they're going to concede that. So I think on rational grounds alone, we can show that these people were mistaken. If they use well-being, it isn't simply, hey, one group has got this idea about well-being, another's got this, and nobody can find out what is likely to be true about that. That's just simply false.
These people cause suffering for this amount of people, so I'm going to act to prevent that because I want to cause the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest amount of people. There is a utilitarian argument present in Hitler's thinking, and everyone was getting behind him for that.
I think that if we look at historical examples of atrocities, they've been motivated not by increasing the well-being of everyone. They've been motivated by a systematic neglect of the well-being of certain people. So, for example, during the Holocaust...
Deity Defeater, Defeater. I don't know what the hell you call yourself that. Anyway, going back to Hitler's example, how did Hitler get the people behind him?
Well,
Again, we're going off on a sidetrack now. You see, this is the problem with a sidetrack. You've got to stay. These guys, it's like trying to keep children focused in a class, right? Especially young children. Their minds wander very quickly. So you have to keep them focused, and there's various ways that teachers have found to do this sort of stuff. And it's the same with some of these guys. I'm not saying necessarily all of them, but at least some of them. You've got to keep them focused on a particular topic. If you or they mention something, either you've got to go after it because it's very strong, or you've got to ignore it, because otherwise you go off on these tangents here. And now you're having Hamza open his mouth about Hitler again. I think it's been very clear that he's answered that question. But again, very likely Hamza didn't follow or didn't understand what was said, so he's now asking about it again.
He wrote fiery, impassioned speeches that people found persuasive.
No. How did he make Jews the enemy?
Well, I think that Jews being the enemy had been a trend in Europe for a long time.
No, how did he make them the enemy?
Been around for quite a long time.
If you don't know, just say I don't know. Stop making stuff up.
I think, like, what answer are you looking for here? Because I think
well, it's not an opinion, mate. It's not an opinion. It's a fact of history. What did Hitler do? How did he make?
Oh, is it? It's a fact. When you say something, it's a fact. It's not an opinion. When other people say things, it's an opinion. You need an actual argument. I appreciate Hamza and arguments are antithetical to each other, but making an assertion is not a fact. We'll just remind everybody of this in case there's any Muslims that actually want this, that think that Hamza is in fact producing facts. No, he's producing assertions that he's claiming as a fact. In order for it to be a fact, he would have to demonstrate it, not just assert it.
And I congratulate the Slayer or Defeater who caught on to this and said, look, I can't answer the question because I don't understand what it is that you are after. So what kind of an answer would you like? Very, very good. Because he picked up when he tried it the second or third time, this was not going to please Hamza because he was looking for something specific. He's always looking for catchwords so that he can go, gotcha. This is what he's looking for. And he picked up on that and he said, listen, what do you want?
The enemy of the people of Germany. How did he demonstrate to the people of Germany that these people are making you suffer? How did he do that?
He pointed to bad things and said Jews were the cause of them.
What bad things?
Like economic woes.
And how did he point to the economic woes? How did he point to the economic woes? What did he point to?
Well, like after World War I, the enormous amount of debt that Germany was in.
Right. So,
but the thing here to ask, and again, I think Deity's getting sort of led down a path that's unnecessary. Yeah. What's the point here? But this is what we're talking about. Why are you bringing this up? If you've got a point, make a point. If you don't have a point, I'll continue on with somebody else.
So in history, I think it's is it Daily Express or something? Judea declared war on Germany. The Jews of Europe declared war on Germany and said all the banks, all the finances are going to cripple Germany economically.
Oh,
and
so
this is going to cause even more suffering to the German people. And so that was the excuse to say, look what they're doing. We need to get rid of these people. Not just get rid of them here, get rid of them in Poland where they're all based. And then let's get rid of them everywhere. So the whole drive behind Hitler and what he did was to alleviate the suffering of his people.
Well, so I would say two things. One is that...
All right, stops. You've got something to say because swearing is not helpful. So go ahead and say something there. I know you're getting frustrated. Rather say something, about it, because otherwise I can hear your frustration in the background.
Yeah, because what can you say, really, Rob? What can you say? This is sick. To go around now and say, well, it's actually the fault of the Jews. It's actually the Jews who asked for it. They were asking for this, and what Hitler was doing was actually positive because he was looking after his own people by getting rid of a cancerous part of society that was declaring war on his own people. So he was actually a very benevolent guy who was just looking out for his own people, and that is why he was taking care of the Jews. That, in my eyes, is so horrendous. I have no words for this. This is why I'm boiling here. How somebody can be so callous, so inhumane to come up with something like this. It's unbelievable for me. I can't handle this. If somebody is so horrible and so evil and scheming and it's amazing. I can't express this.
Okay, but this is also a good lesson for everybody who's watching. You see how Stops is frustrated. You see that the path that Deity has allowed this to go down, because he could have nipped this in the bud, right? It isn't helpful, and it's nothing to do with the original topic. So you can see how easily people, can get frustrated or led down a path that is completely unnecessary. But you don't need to. This is completely irrelevant, and you nip it in the bud there unless you want to fight this point. And if you don't want to fight, and I don't think he actually does, and he's quite right not to want to challenge this, you just don't allow it. You just carry on with something else, because this is not relevant to the point. And if he insists he is, you insist it's not. And if he wants to kick you off, that's fine, right? Then he looks even more of the fool. But it's not a response to anything that he's said so far. And this all comes about again because Ijaz had an emotional response, right? Because he's suffering and so forth, and somehow he thinks that it's okay for him to have a little rant about it and say, well, he's not worried about God and so forth. Oh, he's not blaming God because of his suffering. Well, maybe he should be blaming God. Maybe he's just not paying attention and he ought to be blaming God. Or if he's not, then he should be praising God and he should be looking for more suffering. But he's got to be consistent, right? And so now we've gone down this long tangent here that is, in my view, completely irrelevant. And that's where, even if you're a single interlocutor, you've got to control it. Now, it might be they kick you off, but going down this route isn't helpful, right? Because now you have to try and put out little fires here that are ridiculous. They aren't helpful to the original discussion.
But actually more than two things. One, Hitler was definitely not a utilitarian. Two is that I don't think that utilitarianism should be held to every single bad thing that every utilitarian has done. Much like I don't think that Muslims should be held to every bad thing that any Muslim has done in history. And three, I think that if we actually look at the historical record, we find that overwhelmingly utilitarians are on the right side of history and hold progressive ideals that are far ahead of their time. I mean, examples I gave before.
We have a present day example. We have a present day example in China. What Chinese are doing to the Uyghur Muslims there. They believe they're protecting Chinese society from these terrorists, in their opinion.
Okay,
and they're interning them and they're raping them, and what?
And I think that anyone with an ounce of sense recognizes that the suffering that China is inflicting upon the Uyghurs, it just the marginal benefits from it just in no way compare to the horrendous.
Well, really, so the people of China don't benefit from the leaders of China.
Okay, listen again, that the people of China don't benefit. He said there's marginal benefits to their view, but I think anybody could make a rational argument that the suffering of these people far outweighs any potential benefit, and therefore it can't be that they're using utilitarianism. That's his simple argument. Hamza's response, so you're saying that the Chinese people don't benefit at all. This is why I say he's the king of straw man. Whatever you say, he will either ignore it or he will take the most extreme straw man position that he possibly can and respond back as if that's what you've said. It's such a pattern with this guy that I don't know whether he actually doesn't pay attention or he is paying attention and he's just programmed himself to be as uncharitable and to provide the biggest straw man that he possibly can. But it makes him look like a complete imbecile and somebody that is totally intellectually dishonest.
China say this is a threat. They're a communist regime. They're an atheistic regime. They see this monotheistic entity as a threat to their atheistic society, and they believe for the good of the whole of the society, they need to root out this problem. And you think they're going to be on the right side of history? Talking rubbish, mate. Asadullah, put the baby down. Deal with him.
Oh no.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. First, I just want to say to all the guests, Brother Shaq, it's nice to see you here as well. I pray that you're doing well. I apologize. I'm going to be here. I just heard some things, and I just wanted to jump in really quick. I'll be as concise as possible, and I have to leave, and then I'll let you guys just do whatever you need.
So, get ready for
okay, Deity Defeater. First off, I just want to take the.
Sorry, what's that?
Sorry. I just wanted to comment while it was quiet. Get ready for half an hour. If he says, I want to quickly jump in.
Yeah, I think it isn't very long, but I think whatever he says, we can. I think Deity doesn't really deal with it. Moves on from it anyway. So I can't remember exactly. We'll see.
A step back. You mentioned Michael Huemer. I've had the pleasure of speaking with Professor Huemer on a number of occasions, especially with regard to theism, the default position. And he regards his method of phenomenal conservatism to be actually a foundational methodology, actually to rationalize theism as the most rational position between atheism and theism. So when you talk about the intuitive notions of reality, the intuitive perspective, right? It seems to me that theism would be much more convincing in that regard, especially since it's a normative belief among human beings that there are transcendent properties or transcendent things beyond the natural world. So that's number one. So I just wanted to
okay, well, that's just an assertion. What's the argument? You can name drop somebody, but you haven't provided an argument for why theism better accounts for this. And making it like a baseless assertion obviously isn't something that we ought to take seriously.
figure out how you are utilizing humor to justify your position, especially in moral realism, without recognizing that theism is also rationally justified under the same method. That's number one. And please excuse me, I'm going to give you like 2 more and then I'm going to leave. Okay, so you can answer these. Number 2, my other issue is with respect to evil. Now, if we look at a pragmatic sense, you seem to have an issue with what Brother Yusuf was bringing up regarding how it's not an adequate explanation that all this evil, there's an ultimate good behind it, and it seems to be unnecessary. First off, my first question would be, how do you understand that? How do you know it's unnecessary, number 1? And number 2, how is it that you said this thing about how it basically makes us apathetic, or at least justifies apathy towards fixing evil because there's a greater good involved. However, what about the notion that one of the goods is the reward of trying to stop that evil, and that Allah or God is really just rectifying what's left over? So essentially, it's our job, our obligation to do good deeds to solve the suffering, and whatever's left over that we can't deal with, that's what Allah deals with. Okay, that's what He rectifies, right? So how is it that's not brought into the equation? And then finally,
okay, you talk about a shotgun level of things. Let me level 5, 6 claims against you, and then jump off the stream, right? As to this idea, this last idea here, because the other stuff, I don't see that there's much in that. They just bare assertions. He hasn't made an argument. He's name dropped somebody, but hasn't made an argument. But as to this idea that, hey, the benefit of the suffering is that we can do good deeds to alleviate it. So again, it's the same sort of thing that Yusuf was saying, right? That this is completely unhelpful. Because if it's the case that suffering is needed so that humans can do good deeds, well, then you ought to have even greater suffering than we currently see in the world, because that would allow even greater good deeds. So the question for somebody like this is, at what point are you saying that the suffering is at its maximum? Because all I have to say to you is, well, hey, we could have a bit more suffering, and that would allow more humans to do greater good deeds. And so even by that standard, there isn't enough suffering using your logic, which means that God is not all good, because He should then allow more suffering, because by your lights, that would allow more humans to do greater good deeds. And so by your lights, then there's even a greater good that would essentially accrue at the end of the day. So there's not enough suffering in the world by your lights. Right? So I think that argument is inconsistent. And have you got some standard by which you can present an argument and say, the exact amount of suffering in the world that's at the moment is precisely the maximum that ought to be the case for an all-good God? Because you are clearly saying that that suffering is necessary and there's no unnecessary suffering. How did you establish that it's the perfect amount of suffering that's in the world that is necessary? How would you do that? Because at the moment, all you're saying is, well, it allows for humans to do some good deeds to override the suffering. Well, then have more suffering, we'd have more good deeds that overrides it even more, and then we'd have even better good in the world. At what point, what's your argument to say, no, that's not the case? We couldn't have more, we couldn't have less. This is precisely the amount that we need. All you're going to do is make a faith-based claim and say, hey, it's the will of God. He knows best. Well, obviously, that's got completely vacuous. Nobody's going to take that seriously if that were to be your argument. So I would like to hear what your argument is with regards to this point, because it seems to me you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're not actually presenting anything substantive.
I think that the last thing that I wanted to bring up, well, with respect to your perspective here, was the notion of, you brought up something about numbers before. Again, going back to humor, I don't think that his intuitive perspective would necessarily lead to the idea of the sort of Neoplatonic viewpoint that there are actual numbers that exist. Because it's the same way saying like language exists. Well, language doesn't really exist. These are just representations. They're just utterances that we utilize in order to. They're symbols. Sorry, my apologies. They're just symbols that reflect the reality outside. Correct. So I mean, it doesn't necessitate that because I have an intuition regarding difference. Like I can see the difference between this and this. That necessitates that numbers exist per se. Like there's an actual number 1 that's floating around in some ether.
Look, there are people that are Platonists that think numbers do exist. This is a minor, insubstantial point in the greater scheme of things. The fact that he's going to harp on about this tells us that he's trying to find the smallest things to bring up, and hopefully Darwin's Deity Defeater, doesn't respond to this particular point. This is so tangential; it's of no value whatsoever in the great scheme of things.
You know what I'm saying? That doesn't make any sense. But I think that you should really answer the first one. I think it's the one that I'm most concerned with is how is it that you're utilizing humor here to justify your moral realism, but at the same time, you're not utilizing it to justify theistic belief, because we have this idea in Islam called the fitrah, where we are intuitively believers. So that's where I think you haven't been able to deal with yet, and I really want to see that dealt with. And I do apologize, I'm a little bit all over the place here, but yeah, if you could do that, I'd like to hear that conversation. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
The baby is cute, mashallah.
And
add another one. Add the fitra to it now.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just sort of move on, right? Coming in with a baby to throw out a few points, make some assertions, not actually provide any argument. The only thing that you did attempt to provide an argument was this last idea, which I responded to. The numbers thing I wouldn't even bother with. So that hasn't been particularly worthwhile at all, in my view.
So what is your suggestion? Really, is it really just to go and say, well, thanks for that. Let's move now with the original point? Is that the approach that you think would be best?
In my head, I'm going to, if I was sitting there, I'm going, which if anything that he's just said is worth talking about? Because remember, here's my original argument about the unnecessary suffering of animals, right? That's my original argument. Based on that, I'd have to make a call and go, okay, is there anything there that I would do? And like I say, the only thing that I thought might be worth arguing or responding to was the one that I did do towards the end there. The other points I'm not particularly interested in. But then again, I've got a different view perhaps to the deity. I don't know who that particular philosopher is, but I wouldn't have been referencing him anyway, so I wouldn't have been responding to that particular point. But otherwise, I'm going like, how's this useful? And in my mind, what I could do and I could say at that point is, hang on, this, you've brought all these things in. I don't think any of these is particularly substantially relevant to my point, which is this. I've provided this argument. I haven't heard a substantial response to this, so I'm gonna stick on that. But thanks very much, type of thing. So either way, either you go with one of them, because you can't do all of those things. That's a shotgun, right? That's been a gish gallop there of, hey, let me throw out 5 or 6 points here, and then say, well, actually, the only one I want you to deal with is the very first one. Well, why bring out all the rest then?
How long were you waiting to say that?
I'll hold the baby. I'll hold the baby. I know the shink is chomping at the bit. You want to respond to anything just said then? I'm not going to call you Deity Defeater because it's pathetic. What's your name?
His name is Matthew. He said it.
Matthew. Okay.
Yeah, Matthew. Sorry, just for a point of clarification, I agree with the name Deity Defeater is very stupid, and not a day goes by where I don't regret that's the YouTube name that I chose. But anyways,
okay.
You could change it.
1 second.
Yeah, don't make yourself suffer. Just change it.
That's unnecessary suffering right there.
Yeah. So in terms of the point about humor, so humor, I too have had the pleasure of speaking with Michael Huemer, and he is in fact an atheist. You can Google this if you're skeptical. And the point that I would make in terms of whether intuitions lead to the existence of God. So I think that the determiner is not whether we just have an initial gut intuition that it's true. The question is, after careful reflection, is there general convergence among rational people that that some claim is true based on their intuitive seemings? I think that is the case with moral truth. So with moral truths, almost anyone who considers it for a long time concludes that you shouldn't torture babies for fun. Don't do that. But I think that in terms of religion, people come to wildly different conclusions on the basis of their intuitions.
Why in your worldview shouldn't you torture babies for fun?
Well, because I think that it's objectively wrong.
Why is it wrong? In your worldview?
I think well-being is good and suffering is bad. Torturing babies causes.
Why should that be the case in your worldview?
He's just explained that the fact that he has to ask that question again means that he's utterly clueless, right? He's just explained to him based on his standards why it's wrong. Then he asked the question again, why is that wrong in your worldview? So what he's just said, either Hamza didn't hear or he didn't understand or both. It was in one ear and out the other. Right? And that tells you a lot, right? Because when somebody asks the exact question to which you've just given the answer, then you've got to ask yourself, is he just not able to understand? Is my accent, am I speaking too fast? Or is he literally not able to comprehend what I've just said? And then the question is but you've got to do this in a hurry, right? It's not always easy. Is it worth continuing down that line with that particular person? Especially if there's other people that I'd rather speak to. Do I want to, go for the lowest hanging fruit, or do I want to speak to somebody that I can have potentially a more substantive conversation with? So you've got to evaluate these things very quickly, which is not always easy to do. I
think this is where experience comes in. One thing I want to point out, I quite like what he did, because he one-upped Asadullah, whatever, when he said, well, I'm quoting Huemer, and the guy says, well, I've actually met him and talked to him, and what he has said is this, and if you then take what he says and bring it back to the unnecessary suffering, then this is what we have. So he was like, he did a really neat U-turn to bring it back on topic and still kicking Asadullah in the nuts by telling him, well, you can quote him. Well, I know the guy. So I like that very much, how he brought it back on topic, only to be derailed once again by Hamza.
Yeah, and I had a quick look here as well. I was just having a quick look at the full papers, and Michael Humer's in there, if I've got the right person, right? And he does think that he accepts Platonism, the idea that abstract objects are Platonic in nature, i.e. that they do exist in the real world, so numbers do actually exist. And that's his view, and I'm looking at it here. I'll actually post it here into the chat here for other people to go and look at, right? There's more there. I just had a very quick look at it. I was wanting to check if he is in fact atheist. It didn't say. I just want to see if it actually says here. Oh, he leans towards, so God is theism or atheism. He leans towards atheism, right? So there's the view on that. So that seems to be, that's for Michael Humer. If it's the same guy, then he leans towards atheism, according to the full papers. And you'll also see his other responses there. Cool. Okay, so that was interesting that obviously he'd spoken to him as well.
Well, I don't know what you mean by why should that be the case.
Well, in your worldview, you're a random molecule bouncing about. There's no good or evil.
Well, obviously that's not true. He's a moral realist, so obviously he thinks there is actually good and evil. This is why, bringing up anything philosophical or anything more nuanced with Hamza is a complete waste of time. Right? It's an absolute waste of time. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He can't follow the argument, and these responses tell us this. This is not us ad hominem. It's based on the responses that he's actually saying, that you're just a random molecule in motion.
He loves
but
that.
Obviously, you're not a random molecule. If you think determinism is true, then it's not random. It's the exact opposite of random. It's determined. And these same quote-unquote molecules and motions get us to the moon, do music by Mozart and this sort of stuff. So in this worldview, that's the most uncharitable position you can possibly take, and a not accurate one anyway. And somebody like this particular fellow does think that there is right and wrong. Right? So this is a complete misrepresentation, and again, a massive straw man again. Right?
You just do what you can do, YOLO, and that's that. So why is doing that bad? What moral, what standard are you using to say it's bad?
So I'm not, unlike many of my fellow atheists, I'm not a moral naturalist. I think that there are certain elements of reality that can't be explained purely in naturalistic terms. So, for example,
okay, this is not a good response to speak to Hamza, right? What he's going to go through is a particular philosophical view now, but it is totally inappropriate to respond to Hamza with this. This is like if you brought this to a kindergarten child or to a child in lower school here in the UK, they would have no clue what you're saying. Right, so this is for somebody that's much more sophisticated. Maybe Yusuf, probably not even Yusuf here, I don't know. Maybe Asadullah Ali or somebody that understands what he's actually saying, and that's definitely not Hamza. So I think this response would be good for a particular person that understood it and was at a higher level, but it's not a good response if you decide you're going to speak to Hamza.
I think that very, very likely consciousness is a non-natural phenomenon. I think that we can't really give a purely natural account of things like numbers, of things like epistemic reasons for belief, modal truths, etc. And so I think that morality lies similarly in the realm of it's just a necessary thing that has no deeper explanation, much like there's no deeper explanation of why 1 + 1 = 2. That just is the case. I think similarly, suffering is bad, and I can make arguments for why I think I'm justified in believing that.
Well, but it's just been demonstrated to you how suffering isn't bad.
Hold on, Matthew.
Okay, so listen again. It's been demonstrated to you that suffering isn't bad. Exactly when and by whom was it, quote unquote, in inverted commas, demonstrated to you that suffering wasn't bad? Oh, do you mean the assertions, the self-defeating assertions, I would suggest, that Ijaz made earlier? Was that a demonstration? Listen to what this guy says, right? His idea of a demonstration is, hey, one of my Muslim buddies went on a rant or made an assertion for which he didn't provide an argument, and that somehow is a demonstration. Right? This is the standard of this particular individual. And now I ask you, is it worthwhile taking your time to engage with somebody like this?
No, you have to treat him like a waiter, a forgetful waiter. You give him an order and say, "Can I have a I don't know, a whiskey Coke or something, and then say, can you repeat my order, please? So what you have to do is say a sentence and then ask Hamza, can you repeat what I just said, just so that, you know, we can ascertain that we're on the same level. This is how you have to treat him. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
See, I think you're taking, the first thing, let me just say one thing, right? And I've been waiting this whole time to say this.
Yeah.
Your problem is you want the creator and God, or whatever you want to call it, and everything to fit your idea of right and wrong. The reality, let me wake you up to reality, red pill right now coming out, right? Is you are not in charge. You didn't choose when to be born. You will not choose when to die. You don't choose when to get sick. You will not choose. There are certain things you will make decisions, but in reality, you are a slave of Allah, whether you know it or not. I mean, just letting you know, right?
Thank you very much for telling us that. Yeah, go ahead, you first, if you like. Go for it.
No, I just want to say, I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, it shows that this Farooqa really is just as clueless as Hamza. He really doesn't understand what is going on. We are talking about an assertion in the Quran about a God who claims it is the most and the all-merciful. And then, at the same time, we see that this all-powerful, all-knowing, all-merciful, and with all these attributes, God or entity or whatever you want to call it, goes and has unnecessary suffering of animals who really don't have any choice. This is what we're talking about. It's not my personal standard or his personal standard. We're talking about a claim in the Quran. We're talking about a claim in Islam that is being compared to real life, to reality, and that there's a mismatch. That is what we're talking about. It's not that even I demand that the God adheres to my laws. All I'm doing is I'm asking, why is this God not consistent? And that is the problem here, not what you think.
And thank you again to Uthman for just confirming for me why I wouldn't accept Islam. I'm not going to be anybody's slave, much less the slave of a quote-unquote creator, just because he created me. Then I'd wish for annihilation. And if I could do it myself and help other people, I would do exactly the same. And as you pointed out, this is not a standard that he himself is picking. He's pointing out this is an internal critique of Islam, which of course Farooq has no clue what that means, but this is an internal critique saying, hey, you claim that this God is all merciful or all good. Here is what we consider unnecessary suffering. Here's what I mean by unnecessary suffering. What is your response to this? So it's not that he's coming, he could do an external critique of his own standard, but this is an internal critique and say, hey, here's what I think. So this idea that it's not his choice, God doesn't submit to him, is just a complete and utter misunderstanding of the argument that he's bringing.
There's not really, I mean, I know you're writing down points because you were on debate team in high school or something, you want to take point by point, but that's not the point here, right? Let me ask.
What's the point? Because, of course, you're the main guy here. You set what the points are because somehow you're wearing a white cap and that somehow makes you the official about what the correct point is to go after. By all means, tell us, O mighty one, what the actual point is by your subjective, arbitrary standard. But we'll take that as somehow objective, of course.
At least somebody is bringing some standard, some structure, some coherence into the whole thing and trying to get it point by point by point. That is what you should be doing. Exactly what Rob just said. You first do this, then this, then this, and then you can start discussing the points. You're not doing that. You're all over the show. You're going sidetracking here, going there, or going off on a tangent. That does not help. You need to address the central issue here, not what you guys are doing.
Matthew, you do realize that we didn't come on our own accord, right? Meaning you don't have an explanation of where we came from, right?
Well, what do you mean by where?
Okay, so again, this is where Matthew's getting caught, right? That's not a question that you ought to be answering. You're now going down another rabbit hole. Right? Do not go down these rabbit holes. Don't answer this question. You just respond with, hey, here's my argument. Can you address this? I'm not going to go with red herrings and tangents about something that is irrelevant. That's all you need to say here. Now, either he can go back to the point or he can ramble on and you just ignore him. But going down this point is not a good way to continue.
Where we came from.
Humans, where did we develop from, right?
Well, I mean, I think that we evolved from other simpler organisms.
Right, where did they come from?
Well, they came from other simpler organisms. In terms of where the first thing came from.
Sure.
Yeah, so the first life, I think we don't exactly know where they came.
So we don't know. You don't know, right? So I don't know.
There are different plausible accounts of where they might have.
But none of.
So how is this relevant to the original point? That's all you have to ask here. It's not relevant. He'll try and make a breach, and it'll look absolutely pathetic if you ask him, how's this relevant to my original argument, which was a critique of the view that you've got an all-merciful or most merciful or all-good God, right? And there is nothing. Right? This is because he's gone off on a tangent. I bet you if you had to ask Farouk, what is the main point that I originally came with? He would not know.
He wouldn't know.
He would not be able to tell you what the original critique was that you came with. Right? And that should tell you everything you need to know about whether these guys can follow an argument and pay attention.
But none of those you can't really test any of them in a controlled environment, so we don't really know, right? So you don't know where you came from. What's the purpose of your life?
Well, I mean, I think that the purpose of my life is to try to make the world a better place.
Where did you get that from? Like, how did you figure that out? What if somebody feels the purpose of their life is to make the world a worse place? Would that be equally as valid?
So I think that it would not be, because I think that we have decisive...
Why? That's interesting. So you feel your moral...
Okay, he asked him why and then just carried on talking and didn't give him a chance to answer, right? At this point, I wouldn't be going with it. And I'd actually just say, okay, so Yusuf, this is where we were before. Like, I want to make it, at some point, you've got to make it abundantly clear that you're not interested in talking to this blabbermouth who's now gone off on a tangent that's completely irrelevant to the point. Now, you can say that explicitly, or you could just go back to, hey, Yusuf, as we were saying before, right? And you make it very clear that you have no interest in speaking to this guy. That's another way to do it. But at some point, you've got to put your foot down. Otherwise, exactly what's happening now is you're now on the receiving end of answering every random, arbitrary question that somebody's going to give you, and you're completely off your original point. Correct.
Yeah.
Or compass is what should evaluate people's valid reasons or not. Because somebody else could say that they feel, and I've met insane killers, I mean, gang members that they enjoyed killing people. I mean, I hate to even talk about it, but like you would enjoy it.
Sorry.
Right? So the
yourself.
point is, you really don't have a purpose of life. You're kind of making that up for your own self, right? And somebody else could make the equally opposite purpose, and you really have no evidence to show why yours is more valid than the other, right? Many people around the world would view morality very differently. For example, if you can make a buck off of killing cats and skinning them and selling them, you may find that disgusting. And in other countries, they may find that perfectly acceptable, because you're just making your own relative judgments. And then you're assuming that there's some kind of national or universal criterion for that. And that's all your assumptions. The issue that's not even my question. My question to you is, right?
So why the hell did you bring it up? And it's a trivial point that anybody could say the same thing. Right, hey, did you know that there's all these other religious views about morality as well? Oh, well, he's going to say, but I've got the objective standard. Well, you can't show that it's objective, but even if you had, all you're saying is you've got your standard and other people have got theirs. Thank you for saying nothing substantial at all. So levying that critique at him is completely irrelevant and self-defeating, because you're in exactly the same position. And if you think you're not, you really haven't thought about the topic well enough.
If you stick to what you believe in, like, let me ask you this. There was a man named Muhammad, right? Do you know about him? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You do agree he existed, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If he, as a human being, would it be under his control to do something like split the moon?
Holy crap. Remember where we were at the beginning of this, right? And even at the beginning of the second part of this, when we started this evening. And now we're on to Muhammad splitting the moon. And this, I do like this guy, Matthew, but this is where the experience comes in. You are now allowing yourself to be led by the nose or by the ear or whatever it is, down whatever path, this clueless fellow is wanting to lead. And it's completely away from the path that you wanted to take these guys down, which is what you called about. Right? And that's where you've got to nip it in the bud. You are too keen to answer every single question that is put to you, and that is actually unhelpful to you and to everybody who's listening.
Presumably not.
Presumably not? I mean, you're
well,
all right, there you go. Come on, Matthew, come with it, bro. It would not, right? I mean, could you split the moon, Matthew? If I told you, hey, go outside, split the moon?
I could not split the moon.
All right, cool. So if he did, and not only did people around him report it, but a numerous amount, like many people, including enemies and including people that were in other cities and other continents, would you say that would be something amazing, right?
Nobody. Yeah, I have, just for the record, I have not looked into the historical.
I didn't ask you if you had. Okay. I just asked you a question. Would you think that is impressive?
Yeah.
Rob, can you just take 1 second? because maybe we have people listening to this at a later stage who don't know the story. There is, number one, it wasn't Muhammad. It was Muhammad asking his God to split the moon. Okay, this is the way that it's in the Quran. Now, the funny thing is, he's totally messing up the whole story, because his God doing something that is acclaimed has not been seen by anybody outside of Arabia. Now, the most pathetic excuse for this is that people say, well, this was at night when everybody was asleep. Now, what this Farouk guy is trying to go to, he says, well, lots of people saw it. No, there is one account of somebody, an Indian king who was on the Arabian Peninsula at the time, who said he saw this. So there's a story about somebody who claimed that maybe he was and did and made it. So this is hearsay of somebody who wanted to be a Muslim and who confirmed everything that he said. This is the reality of the story. So there is nothing at all in this. This is pure fabrication, and it's one of the single most silly stories in the Quran, and he is taking this as a miracle to show that Muhammad was great, even though Muhammad wasn't even part of the whole thing. So this is just, I don't know. I always say, no, I'm not going to explain anything, but I always feel it a duty to explain things for people who don't know Islam so well.
Yeah, and you looked into it as well, didn't you? Because he claimed he'd called up the British Museum and they'd given him some information there, but it turns out that if you follow that trail, all it talks about is a myth. It's not an actual person who existed anyway. But the other thing we could do here is we could say, hey, we just turn the tables, right? I think reductio ad absurdum is a very effective tool that you can have in your arsenal. And that is to provide a counterexample that reduces his position to absurdity in the following sense. I would just ask him, hey, if Thanos existed and he snapped his finger with a glove, would you find it impressive if he wiped out half of humanity? You would have to say yes. Right? So all you do is you say that, right? If somebody does something impressive, will I find it impressive? It's like a circular argument, isn't it? It's a tautology. If somebody does something impressive, would you find it impressive? Yes. Thank you for saying something that's utterly trivial.
Yeah.
But the implication is that if this amazing thing happened, then it ought to be good, etc., etc. And all you have to do is give an exact counterexample, because it could be that Thanos existed and snapped his fingers. So what? Yes, that particular action is impressive. It's more than a human could do. So what?
Well,
I'm impressed
Jesus made wine from water.
Yeah, or whatever it is, right? Or Thor with his hammer, or whatever other comic book character you want to come up with.
If you want to go on a tangent, yeah.
Now, if that wasn't the only thing, like let's say he was at a place where it was dry during war, and water came out of his hands, and not like okay, he just said it, like there were hundreds of witnesses that all saw it and documented it, and we can prove it.
No,
and then other things happened, like somebody had their eyes.
Hey, what about a guy that was crucified and then resurrected 3 days later? 500 people saw it, and before he was resurrected, he did all these miracles. He walked on water. He created 5,000 fishes. He created food, loaves and fishes for 5,000 people. Is that impressive? Oh, well, no, we don't have reasons to believe that. Oh, but there were 500 witnesses, right? What happens if a man came from Krypton and landed here and he was able to fly? He was able to move the earth and do superhuman feats. Would you find that impressive? So what? Right? Can you see what happens when you do a reductio ad absurdum? When you take a counterexample, you can see how absurd it is, right? He's not saying anything impressive here. It's utterly trivial.
Were blinded, and he took some of his saliva and put it there, and they were able to see. And not just those two people, like we can connect the chain and check all the narrations. And this happened repeatedly. Would you say there's something supernatural going on, right?
I mean, maybe. I think that that would certainly be very strong evidence for it.
Excellent. If a man who couldn't read or write, who was illiterate by consensus of the historian,
all you have to do is shortcut this and say, hey, this guy did 10,000 impressive things. If somebody else did 10,000 impressive things, would you be impressed? Right, and thank you very much for this. And now let's get back. Just shortcut this, right? Shortcut this whole thing, because this is a waste of time. How is this relevant to my case that I think that there's unnecessary suffering, which then I would view as constituting evil. And if evil exists, evidential evil exists, then your God couldn't exist, because your God is supposed to be all good, and we wouldn't expect to see evil, unnecessary evil, or unnecessary suffering, which is gratuitous evil.
And we've seen how this works, by the way. So this is not just like out of the blue some suggestion. We've seen it at work, and we've seen how effective this kind of an approach really is.
Historians that document his life came forward with a book that was became the standard for a language that the best poets couldn't respond to, right? Would you say that's kind of a amazing thing?
Did he come up with that? No, he did not come up with that.
Yeah,
Stop,
I think
stop making stuff up.
Well, that's obviously what he's going to make up, right? And Matthew doesn't know any different, so he's going to take it charitably that what he's saying is in fact the case. Right now, we're going to challenge every one of those points, but Matthew isn't. But the whole point is here, hey, he did. Let's say that everything you said is the case, that he actually did all of these things. Was this supernatural? Well, it depends how you define supernatural. Is it impressive by normal human standards? Yes, it's impressive. But I'm going to ask you again, Thanos snapping his fingers, is that impressive? Wiping out half of humanity with a single snap of his fingers, is that impressive? And all we're showing is somebody or an entity or a human or something can do something impressive. So what? What the original claim is, there's a moral question and answer here. And whether the person is moral or immoral, they can still do impressive things by human standards. So what?
Strong historical evidence for all of these things, such that we would be justified in concluding that he spoke the moon and did all these other miraculous things.
Then you would believe that he had some kind of a supernatural power supporting him, right? If we could prove it historically.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, great, Matthew. We're making good progress here, bro. All right, so
no, we're not.
I have a video. I mean, I'm not going to take 10 hours here to explain it, but I have a video on this issue. Watch it. You can get to me through Hamza, or because if you message me, I'm not going to respond because I don't know who you are, right? And watch the video. And I have a series that documents not just that one miracle, like continuous things that happened during the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I have 3,000 evidences, not 3,000 incidences, but evidences that I go over. But understand, it's not like those miracles that people talk about, oh, some dude flew in the sky or something. No, like this is where his enemies were like, we were at war with him and we saw it, right? And his companions, they saw it, and other people, they saw it. And we can document who saw it and how good was their memory and where they lived.
Why would we want to watch a video like that? His argument, and the reason he doesn't believe in theism or indeed Islam, is because of the evidential problem. Or he didn't say evidential, but he said the problem of evil. And I think the evidential problem is more powerful than the logical problem. But they both critiques against an all-powerful God. How is this useful to go watch all of his videos? Why would I go and watch this? It's like
because he has 3,000 evidences.
Yeah, but why would one care about that? Why would one care? Because an evil entity could support a human in doing all of those things to have people believe that this evil entity is in fact good, and they have no way to establish that it in fact is a good entity. They have to take it on faith, because all the evidences, quote unquote, that this entity does, allows a human to do on its behalf, could just as easily be done by an evil entity. What is this? What's called the symmetry breaker? It's something I learned not that long ago. What's the symmetry breaker that he could establish that his God is in fact good and not evil with some malicious purpose and is making people believe that it's good? So all of this is irrelevant. Why would we go watch these videos? There's absolutely no reason to watch it. That would be my question. Why would I need to watch this? Suppose for a moment that I granted you that he did all of these things. So what? Is it logically possible that an evil entity could trick a human being and allow a human being to do all of these things? Is that possible? If he says no, good luck trying to argue for that. If he says yes, well then, so why would I care? What you really need to establish is that your entity that allowed Muhammad to do all of these things, if we granted that, which is, of course, a massive grant that we wouldn't normally do, but if we were to grant it, so what? Why would we care? It doesn't show that your entity is good. It just shows your entity has some power. So what? Evil entities can have power as much as good entities.
Lived and how good was their moral character, and then whoever they reported it to, we can check all of them. Like, it's not just like somebody just says something or it happens 200 years later, right? So when you have repeated incidences like that, would you not believe that there is a divine message being shown to us?
Yeah, if I were convinced of that.
Great. So watch the video, and inshallah you'll be convinced, and we'll do shahada next time.
Inshallah.
His overconfidence is just remarkable, isn't it? The fact that he thinks he's got an open and shut case just shows how uncritical this human being is in terms of his thinking. Imagine we brought this guy onto the Gin and Tonic show, and had a conversation with him alone. And he tried this sort of stuff with us. Imagine that were to be the case.
Inshallah.
All right. What's the name of the video?
You have to work for it. Are you on Facebook?
No, Matthew, I'll make it easy for you. My name is Uthman, Uthman, Ibn, Ibn, Farooq. Uthman ibn Farouk.
I can see that.
All right, cool. Well, there you go. Just put that and put moon splitting, for example, in Google. Or you can
watch the video. Okay, yeah.
Watch the video. And then if you go to Masjid, Masjid Ribat, that's the name of our mosque. There's a series on the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. You can watch those. And I continue to give references. Like I'll say, okay, this book, it was reported here, the authenticity of the narration, who saw it, who all saw it, right? So watch through those, and then you will realize that this can't be coincidence. Like, you know, I mean, if you flip a coin, you can get it one, sort of that, so on and so on. You can't continuously get heads, right? Well, if you have it every single time, every prophecy comes true. Every time there's one miraculous event after the other. You got to say like something is different. When you realize that this is your creator sending you a message, and you realize that you are just one of 7 billion people on the earth today who are all indebted to that one great creator that created you, then you would read the Quran, read the words of your creator to see what your creator wants from you, and then what's right and wrong and here and there will become clear from what your creator wants, not from your own. Because if you make your own assumption, everybody's going to have.
Okay, so let's just be clear here, and I'm letting this go on. This is a preachy rant. This is in no way substantive. Nobody would find this persuasive or interesting. This is just the Christian or the Buddhist, whoever could come on and say exactly the same thing. This is just a preaching rant and is of no value. I'm letting this go and not interrupting this. I'm only interrupting now to say that I'm not going to say anything more on this, because this is just an insubstantial, irrelevant rant. That's it, right? We're not going to take up any more time dealing with this, because this is in no way dealing with Matthew's original claim.
They have their own rights and wrongs. But anyway, watch the video, watch the series, contact Hamza to get with me so we can do your shahada, inshallah. Allah guide you and me.
Yeah. Can I just respond really fast to just one other point that was made, which was the point that was made about how I think that we just compare things to my standard. I don't think that we just compare things to my standard, because I'm a moral realist. I think that there is an external standard such that I think that if you torture infants for fun, you're doing something objectively wrong. And
but again, see, you go to examples that are extreme, right? Let's give you an example of skinning live cats and selling them for food, right? Here, there are cultures that find that perfectly acceptable. Like many, like I was in a country, I'm not going to mention the name, I don't want to offend anybody, and people were eating dogs. And I found that disgusting. I found that horrible, right? You take a little puppy and you roast them up and eat them, right?
Do you find it disgusting that at the end of Ramadan, people slaughter in the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of animals in the street and allow them to bleed out and suffer? Do you also find that disgusting?
Or that's a different Eid.
Moral?
There are two different Eids, Rob.
Yeah. So the case when that is happening, do you find that immoral as well? Or are you cherry picking as much as you claim that he's cherry picking or other people are? I just want to be clear if you have a consistent standard, Farouk, about the suffering of animals, or is it only certain animals that you've got some, cultural upbringing about that you find disgusting? Why don't you find it disgusting when the throats of sheep or goats or cows or other things are slit and they're allowed to bleed out on the floor? And if you do, then you should be speaking out against all your other Muslims that do this. I suspect that you aren't going to.
And they found it equally disgusting that I eat beef, right?
Sorry, you wanted to say
Rob, just one moment. Somebody's asking, are you guys going to review the video for comedic purposes? I don't think this is a comedy. I think this is actually quite sad. I think this is evil. I think it is showing what is wrong in Islam. It is wrong with how the Islamic message is brainwashing people, how it is restricting the thinking process, that you are no longer able to logically, rationally, and critically think and be able to look at arguments or assess anything accurately. What we are trying to do, I'm taking this with humor, because I cannot throw up more and I cannot voice my disgust even more. That is why I'm trying to take this with humor, because it is so revolting, it is so disgusting to see how they are trying to justify unnecessary suffering of animals. And this is what we are talking about, okay? So I was talking about reviewing the moon splitting video. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, then I got you completely wrong. Sorry, then I apologize, I got you wrong. No, we've done the moon splitting. We don't need to do that again. And I'm not actually one. I don't want to make fun of the people. All right. I don't think our job is to only ridicule. Yes, we do ridicule to a certain extent, but not only. So I'm sorry, I got you wrong on the first one, but the second one then clarifies it.
So here, now you see the more, when you talk about torturing babies, you go into an extreme, but when you look at the middle, there's a lot of relativism here. There's a lot of, what people will do.
So I'm not going to accept your example. I'm going to go with some other example because that fits my narrative better. Well, he can say, well, I'm just not going to accept your example of that. I'm going to go back to babies, right? Either you deal with that scenario or you give a reason why you're not going to accept it. And to say it's extreme, well, that's exactly the point. You push the extreme to go, are you going to be morally consistent? And I'm going to use the extremes, because the extremes often show to what degree somebody is consistent. So him just sidestepping this and hand-waving it away and say, well, I don't want to deal with the extremes. No, that's exactly the things that you do want to deal with, because that tests, your moral consistency and your standards.
And it's his standard all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Ideology, for example, or what people do for communism, and there's millions of people that believe, right? It's not like there's like 10 guys in a psycho shop, right? So be very careful. Boiling a lobster to eat it, right? Like many people will be horribly disgusted by that, right? But millions of people do. So don't go there. Rather learn what your creator has set as right and wrong, because your creator will know better than you.
Yeah.
Cool?
Yeah. How did you establish that your creator knows what's right and wrong, and then you get him babbling on again with nothing important to say? And I think it's somebody like this, it seems to me, he's that sort of preaching guy. He's not able to give a substantive response, but what he is particularly good at, for those that allow it to happen, is they can go on a preaching rant, as if he's then said something substantial that somebody else ought to take seriously. And I think that's obviously not the case, right? So, and I think that's why he wouldn't go on the gin and tonic, or indeed, speak to me or Stops or both of us or whatever the case is, because none of this preaching or ranting or whatever will be effective to us, and we will explain why that's the case.
Cool. I think that's a brilliant point you made. So, Matthew, do you accept if a creator exists, he would be the source of supreme guidance and source of objective morality?
Hopefully he says no. Let's just hear what he says.
No, because I think that...
Thank you. He said no. Brilliant. And he's going to tell us the reason why. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much for that.
I think
no. So the one who created you,
and he wanted to give a reason, and what's happening now? He's being overtalked, right? He said no, and the reason why, and he gets overtalked. Right?
Created you,
and why is he getting overtalked? Because Hamza can't understand that somebody could say no and then actually have a reason. So the fact that he said no just invited Hamza to interrupt there immediately, because I would be going, okay, no, why not, right? I'm interested in the why. But of course, he's not. The fact that he answered in the negative is just incomprehensible to Hamza. So he's not going to stop and listen for the reason why, because that's the important part, the reason why.
You doesn't know what's good for you and what's bad for you.
Well, maybe he might know what it is, but I don't think he would be the source of it. Because I think that if you say that God is the source of morality, then I think that's a...
So if God appeared to you now and told you his standard of morality is what it is, would you accept it?
Okay, that's a terrible question. If God appeared to you now and told you what his standard of morality...
Oops, you're dropping out.
And
no, you need to say that again. Ooh. Oh, shit.
You could say yes.
Okay, I don't know when you're going to come back. I don't know if you can hear anything that I'm saying, but everything you said from the beginning of your sentence is completely wiped out. I hope it will come back. You've got a glitch. I wonder what's happening to the base station. Ah, what a pity. Ah, damn. Yeah, this happens. Even in the 21st century, we still have these glitches. We still have these brownouts, whiteouts, whatever you want to call them. And it's a pity because Rob is hosting the video and I'm not able to quickly get access to this exact moment to continue from here. So either it's going to come back or we will have to continue this some other time. Okay, he's trying to log in again. on a different time. Ah, you
hear
hissed
me?
twice now.
Don't know what's happened there. No clue.
Okay, should I chuck you out in the other one?
Yeah. No clue what's happened there.
I can't chuck you out. Can you believe it? Because probably you're a host. Okay. Oh, but now the video's gone. Oh, no.
Is it back? There we go.
Great.
Okay, no clue what happened there.
Okay, so everything that you said from the beginning was completely gone.
Okay, you can hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just trying to think now what I was saying there.
Was it about objective morality? Yeah.
Yeah, so he asked him, if this God came down, the question was asked is, if God came down now and told you his morality, would you accept that? Right, that's an ambiguous question, because you could answer it in two ways. You could say, yes, I can accept that that's what God says his morality is, but I don't think that it's an objective source. Or you can say, no, I don't accept that it's an objective source. So you take the question to mean that it's an objective source. That's a terribly vague question to answer. But when he said no, and he said the reason why, he was cut off, and he should have been allowed to continue on. But it was incomprehensible to Hamza that somebody could say no. So he didn't wait for the reason, which was the important part, started to talk over him. And we've heard the question there, right? If God came down and said to you, this is my morality, would you accept it? But that's a vague, ambiguous question, and a bad one to ask anyway.
Yeah, I would accept. Just to be clear, okay. My point is that I think that morality does not come from God. Now, it might be the case that God knows what morality is, such that if God,
Matthew, this is your feelings again, because objective morality can only come from God.
Okay, it's so clueless. Objective morality can come from God. You can't establish that it's objective. And even if you could establish that it's objective, you can't establish that it's objectively good. So you have two problems that you need to overcome. The fact that you don't realize this or don't understand this. And by the way, this was brought up to him a couple of months ago, and he had no clue about the Euthyphro dilemma, had never heard of it before. But still, at that time, when he was utterly clueless, and it seems he still is, he still decided at that point that he would say some things about it. Right? And this shows you the level that this particular fellow's at. When he's utterly clueless, he will still offer his unsubstantiated, completely clueless opinion anyway when he doesn't understand it. And this idea, again, he's got it drummed into his head that only objective morality can come from God. Well, you can't establish it's objective, and you can't establish that it's good. So you just making that assertion is you're just pissing in the wind to anybody who doesn't believe this.
And the funny thing is that Hamza reacted to the series I made about him, so he is well aware of what I said. And this is one of the things that I mentioned. So he knows about this.
But again, here's where Matthew can say, hang on a moment. Well, I don't accept that God is an objective standard. Can you demonstrate that it is? What's your argument that it is? And I'm going to critique that. And even if you could demonstrate that whatever he says was objective, you still have to establish that it's objectively good and not objective. And how do you differentiate between the two? Yeah. And ultimately, it'll either come down to it's a mystery of God, or you have to take it on faith. You don't have another mechanism by which you can differentiate the two, because you're appealing to God. And once you appeal to God, there's no other way that you can tell. And God could be fooling you, and you would have no way to establish that's not the case.
Everything else is subjective.
So I think that objective morality can't come from God because of the Euthyphro's dilemma. So
I think it can only come from God. It can only come from God.
So can I just explain the objection to the view that you're taking, that it comes from God?
No.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm not going to listen to you again.
I do apologize.
So that's another thing that he did. Can I explain why it doesn't come from God? Hamza's response no, and giggles like a bit of an imbecile. You don't ask permission. You present your argument why it isn't the case. Asking permission to somebody like that, you've just seen, his response is no, I'm not going to deal with that. Why would you even want to speak to somebody like this?
But this was very
embarrassing, right? If you're a Muslim and you're listening to this, you should be embarrassed. If I had an atheist who was behaving like Hamza, I'd be embarrassed. I'd be going, hang on a moment, this is not somebody that you ought to be following. You should be challenging this, right? And I know a couple of atheists that are nowhere near as bad as this, but do things and I'm prepared to call them out, right? And you should be embarrassed if you're a Muslim watching this and thinking that Hamza is in any way a substantive interlocutor, or that one should take him seriously.
there's one more time, I just wanted to say one more thing. I hope Yusuf can also build upon this. So you mentioned that humor is leaning towards atheism. Yes, I'm aware. I just wanted to note what I guess I should have just said in the beginning. What are the defeaters to the intuitive perception of a transcendent? That's what I want to figure out and what I wanted you to discuss. And I had one objection towards your counter regarding the plurality of religious belief. If that's the case, that I guess it's less rational to believe in God and religion on the basis of the plurality of different perspectives on this thing. How is it that you're a moral realist? Because there are also various perspectives on what is objectively moral. Right? Yet there are still, amongst many people, there is still this idea that there is morality, right? So just because arguing over specifics does not necessitate that thing in and of itself is somehow wrong. Because if you look at it compared to atheism, although there are a plurality of religious perspectives, there are still religious perspectives as the norm compared to the abnormal perspective, or the lack of normative, or the non-normative perspective of atheism. So I do apologize. I'm skipping out again. This is the last time I'm talking. I promise I'm leaving.
Okay, completely irrelevant, complete side tangent, red herring, and hopefully he doesn't respond to this. It's got, again, nothing to do with the main point. Right? He's coming in with these tangential points that aren't relevant to the main conversation. And if he wants to have that, then have a separate discussion all about that.
But did you see that he dented his ego?
Who?
Matthew dented the ego of Asadullah with his one-upmanship by saying, well, not only do I quote Huma, I actually met him. He couldn't, that's why he had to go back to Huma and say, well, yeah, I was aware that he was an atheist, of course, and this and this and this. So, he couldn't leave it. He couldn't say, okay, yeah, okay, great stuff. He couldn't acknowledge that. He had to go and have the last word and say something else about this guy, Huma.
Yeah.
It's actually Hoima.
Now, I do apologize, Matthew. It's nice talking to you. I do apologize once again. I'm in and out. I like to jump in sometimes. So, okay, take care.
Yeah. Knock off the figures.
Matthew.
Shit all over the board.
Can I just answer what?
Sorry, are you speaking?
Sorry.
I didn't hear.
I wanted to say that this is the typical thing. A pigeon flies in, knocks over all the pieces, shits on the board, and then flies off again.
No.
I'll tell you what, Matthew.
He's going to go on.
Yes, he's going to go on and respond. No, of course, don't let him respond, right? Because you guys can make assertions. You can have, in inverted commas, demonstrations, which are in fact bare assertions. You can make vacuous claims for which you don't have arguments. But yeah, by all means, don't let him respond, right? Because that's quote unquote going to go on. I mean, I ask you, is this the sort of response that you would expect from a sincere, substantive interlocutor? Exactly the opposite, I would argue.
So
we got the guests.
If you like, email me.
There you go.
Maybe we can continue the conversation
That
elsewhere.
would make more sense.
If I'm honest as well,
I just went on his.
Sorry,
Rob. I just went on his channel. There is no follow-up. Because I was actually waiting for something like this. If he was going to go and say, well, let's have a separate one. I mean, this was just a couple of days ago, but there has been no follow-up.
Did you expect there to be?
Actually, yes, because he does a lot of debates with people. So I could actually see him take Yusuf up on this and say, okay, let's have a debate about something, or let's have a chat about something, not necessarily a debate, just to get onto a separate topic, to learn something about Islam as well, because I see that he does a lot of these debates.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean Matthew. I mean Yusuf. Do you think Yusuf is going to have a conversation one-on-one with him?
Well, if he's offering, I would expect, some degree of sincerity from him.
These are oftentimes vacuous offers that don't actually materialize in any way. He said the same to me, right? Let's have a conversation on moving house, blah, blah, blah. I'm really busy. I said, well, when you're done, nothing's ever happened. But if he really wanted to have a conversation, he would have done so, right?
True. We've also had the same thing with Jordan M, who challenged us and then ducked. Yeah.
Tired, and I want to start.
Well, let's save the best till nearly last. Take care, Matthew.
So my email is contact.ponderingsoul@gmail.com.
Put it in the private chat for him.
Yeah.
All right.
But
I appreciate it.
That's nice talking to you.
Take care, dude. At least he's telling you need like a wig and mask and hat and everything. At least he's 18 now, apparently. This geezer.
Okay, so there we go. That's the end of that. A very poor ending there. Yeah, it's just a poor ending there as well. It's just sad. As soon as Hamza gets involved, the conversation goes even further down. If it's not at a high level, if it's not at a particularly good level already, it just gets pulled down even more. It's like whenever I hear him, it's like grinding, because I know that there's going to be nothing substantive that he's going to say. And that's especially the case when it's any sort of philosophical or moral discussion. That's just way out of his league. And I'm no expert. And I can refer to other people, but at least I can sort of follow along to the best of my ability. And I'll say, hey, I don't understand that, or what about this? And ask some questions that I don't know. There's plenty of arguments I don't know. But I'm not going to claim that I know what I'm talking about when there's something that I'm clueless about, like the Euthyphro dilemma. And so, Stops, your final thoughts?
No, that's it exactly.
So I think the big, again, so this is the end of part 2. So we've got the end of that. I don't know if Matthew will ever watch. I think and again, you always take, especially with interlocutors that you don't know, take them charitably. I do the same. But once you get to know interlocutors, and sometimes you can figure it out, and he was on for a good hour, so you kind of figure out that, there's going to be misrepresentations, there's going to be straw men, there's going to be red herrings, there's going to be anything but actually responding to the point. Yusuf attempted to. I don't think he said anything actually substantial at all, right? At least he attempted. The other people didn't do so at all. Some of them didn't even understand the point. But I don't think in any way there was a substantial response to the idea of unnecessary suffering in the animal kingdom as a defeater against, an all-merciful or an omnibenevolent God. And I actually think it's a very powerful argument as well. There is work to be done in the beginning, and that's why I think you need to ask a few questions. Have a scenario that's logically possible, present it to them and say, hey, here it seems like there's unnecessary suffering. We've agreed that's logically possible. We've agreed that if it were the case, that would amount to evil. If there is gratuitous evil, i.e. evil that has no good purpose, and that would be the case here in this animal example, if it were the case, then that would disprove, the all good God. Right? And if you can get agreement on that and you can present that example, now the burden is on them to show that it's not unnecessary, because you've got to do that heavy lifting in the beginning to get to that point. So there's more work for an atheist to do to make this argument. I don't think it's particularly tough to do, but then once you've done that, then it's up to them. And I think I don't think that they can mount a substantial response to this.
Rob, I've got one idea just crossed my mind. A couple of weeks ago, we said the old thing with the miracles, with the science, with all these things, they sort of came and went, and people sort of tried to save themselves into philosophy where they thought that they could waffle a lot. But I think by now they're realizing that they bit off a little bit more than they could chew, because at the moment, as soon as somebody comes in there who does know philosophy, who is well read in philosophy, who actually knows these people that they are talking about, it shows that they then are out of their depth very, very quickly indeed. And I think what they saw as a savior kind of argument is now backfiring for them.
Yeah. So hopefully that's, again, been hopefully somewhat entertaining, a little bit educational. We've listened, and I always learn something. How could I, if I were in that position, what would I say, etc.,
yeah,
etc.
exactly.
There's always better ways. And of course, we're happy to acknowledge that it's much easier when you're you're not in the hot seat, as it were, as in the live thing, because you will miss things at that moment. But the beauty is we can slow it down, we can break it down, stop it at certain points, make comments, and then you can see how insubstantial their responses really are, because it's not always easy to do it there, and especially not easy if you have 4 or 5 of them. Fortunately, not all of them jumped in at one time, and that sometimes does happen. And again, if anybody else goes on, try to focus on 1 or 2 people, especially if you know the different Muslims and you want to have a conversation with perhaps the most charitable, the most intellectually honest, then you want to try and focus on that person. You want to try and ignore the rest as much as possible. And if you see him going off in the long grass, as it did multiple times there, you either don't respond, then just carry on with the other one as if that person said nothing, or say to them, hey, that's got nothing to do with, and reiterate your point, because the point gets lost, especially over an hour, right? You've got to keep reiterating it. And Matthew did in the beginning reiterate it a couple of times, but then it got lost, right? And then he allowed himself to be led down all kinds of separate paths. And that's where you've got to have the experience to bring it back to the original argument.
And it's funny that you should say this, because this happened this is what happened last night. Because then afterwards I went on the Discord, and there was somebody who did exactly that. When I asked a question, didn't want to answer and tried to derail it. But because we had this like 15 minutes earlier, I said, no, hang on. I asked you a very specific question. Can you please answer my question? No. I said, no, that's not what I asked. So I did not do exactly what you are saying and allow for this, but I focused on it exactly for the reason that we had this just a few minutes earlier.
Yeah, and the other thing one can do to keep it on is say, how does that address my question? Can you remind me or remind us, if you like, if you want to be even more charitable, what my main critique is, and how do you think that your response answered that? Ask one at a time, because it's difficult if you ask multiple questions. Can you remind us what my original critique was? Hopefully they'll say X, Y, and Z, and you go, okay, good. Now, can you explain to me how that response you just gave in any way answered that question? But now they have to think. And it's very powerful if you can ask them a question, because it now gets them to think, or at least attempt to think, right? And that's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can say, no, you're not answering the question. But when you say, no, you're not answering the question, you are making a statement. I was with a client today who's talking about exactly this, the different ways you communicate with people and how they respond. Questions open the mind up. Statements close the mind down. It's automatically defensive. When somebody makes a statement, you're defensive. Your defense is up, and it's got to penetrate through the defenses. When you ask a question, the defenses are down. Right, it's just a psychological way of doing things, and now the mind has to engage if they want to have an intellectual conversation. There's almost a compulsion for us to answer questions, and so questions are a good way to do it. Statements are not quite as good. Now we all fall for this, but I suggest to all of us, ask a question that gives you the same answer as if you asked a statement that they agreed with. But the moment you make a statement, they're less likely to give you the answer that they would do if they ask you a question.
That's a very good point. Yeah, true.
And it's something I was reminded of today, as I say, because I've done some client work today with people who, deal in some level of psychology. So I'm around it, and it just triggers a reminder for me. So hopefully that's been useful. Who knows? We may even be back again. Who knows? Maybe even this weekend. We've got another one. Somebody's asked us to have a look at a review where Apostate Prophet had a discussion with 4 Muslims, and I think it's an edited version from what I saw. It's only about 17 minutes, so hopefully we may come back on this weekend with another surprise. A couple of these in a row, because we've had a bit of a hiatus because Stops and I have been busy. But who knows? So we'll leave it there. Again, Stops, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all the live viewers. We're going to pop on Discord if you want to come and join us. Here is the link I'm posting now into the chat.
I need to get something done. I can't.
Okay, Stops has got other things to do, so I might pop on there. Come and join us if you want to have a conversation offline. Stops, thank you for your time. Thanks to everybody, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you. Cheerio, bye.